The US dollar got its world reserve currency status in 1945, and they took it from the British pound. The British got their world reserve currency started around 1800, and they took it from the Dutch when they fell to the French in 1795. And the Dutch got their kind of sort of world reserve currency status around 1609 because they just became such a widespread trading partner to all these European countries because they did at the time have the best navy. But the largest navy in the world belonged to the Spanish, and there's something very interesting about their currency, and it brings a little bit of wiggle room to the Dutch reserve currency status. The reason why a lot of people claim that the Dutch guilder was the world reserve currency is because it belonged to the country's biggest bank of Europe, which was the Bank of Amsterdam. In fact, that bank was called the Bank of Europe, and since Europe was by far the most powerful continent at the time, the currency that was issued by this bank was known as the reserve currency for these powers. But it wasn't the most widely traded currency in the world. That title belongs to the Spanish dollar, also known as pieces of 8, also known as real de ocho. Starting around 1497 to 1500, Spain was bringing in a ton of silver and gold from the Americas, and they were just so awash in money that they were able to issue this very powerful currency. While the Spanish did not have the banking influence over all of Europe like the Netherlands, they had the rest of the world because they had trading ports in North America, South America, the Philippines, parts of Europe, even parts of Africa. So you could have gone to any trading post anywhere in the world, no matter how remote, and most likely the Spanish dollar would have been accepted as money rather than the Dutch guilder. But if you wanted to make any kind of major trade or loan in Europe, you were using the Dutch guilder, which replaced the Dutch florin. And this is very interesting. I call it the Dutch florin, but doesn't it sound like some very powerful city in Italy? Yeah, Florence. Florence was the birthplace of the Renaissance. It was one of the major commercial, economic, and trading powers of Europe in the 1400s. And that currency was widely accepted all over Europe to the point where the Netherlands adopted it as their own until they decided to replace it with the guilder in 1435. And it's the Florentine florin that has a lot more in common with the Spanish dollar than the Dutch guilder because the Spanish dollar was accepted everywhere, like I said before. It was even accepted in the United States as legal tender until 1857. And the reason why is because the United States had a coin shortage for quite some time. They even modeled their currency off of the Spanish dollar in the very beginning. But even after 1857, it was still traded in parts of Latin America and China, which means that the Spanish dollar was accepted as a legal currency in certain parts of the world for almost 400 years. Longer than the British pound, longer than the Dutch guilder. Who knows? Maybe longer than the dollar, maybe not. And how did Spain manage to have such a powerful currency for this long, even though their military and naval power was a joke by the 17 and 1800s? The Spanish made one economic and military blunder after another after another. Everyone knows that the Spanish Armada lost to the English, and that pretty much decimated a lot of Spanish naval dominance over the rest of the world in the late 1500s. And the only reason why they were able to gain that much power and influence is because they discovered the Americas first, or at least they were the first to capitalize off of it. They got access to all that Aztec and Inca gold and silver, and it made them filthy rich. It should have propelled them further ahead of every other European country for centuries to come, but because the Spanish were nowhere near as industrious as the Dutch or the British, they ended up losing it. The biggest mistake that the Spanish made before any military or economic blunder was the Spanish Inquisition, in which they persecuted anyone who was Jewish, anyone who was Muslim, the most educated and wealthy people of their country. They either killed them and took their wealth, or the people just fled. Their persecution and forced Christianization led to a huge exodus of their best and their brightest, and it took generations for those results to show. If the Spanish devoted their time and energy into science and economics the way they did to torturing Jewish people, Muslims, and Native Americans, they would have had someone on the moon by the 1800s. They would have gotten to the Industrial Revolution way before England. Yet that didn't happen, and their empire fizzled out to a joke that America easily beat in the 1890s. But it's still a fascinating fact to know that their dollar endured long after the demise of the strength of their empire. I am the Geo Hussar. If the Spanish didn't subjugate South America, the British would have. Thanks for watching.